Hi, everybody. This is Mission Control Houston. We want to welcome you guys there at the Heritage Middle School in Idaho. I'm joined by Dottie Metcalf-Lindenburger, who is an astronaut. I'm Josh Byerly here, and Dottie is willing to take your questions. She'll probably take all the hard ones. I'll take the easy ones. So,
Easy how it is, Josh.
so I think we're ready to go.
What's our first question?
Okay, are you guys there? We're ready to take your questions here inside Mission Control. So if you're ready to go ahead and step up and ask whatever you want to ask us.
All right, so let's start with Tyler. Do you have a question for them? Good morning. Thank you, guys. Austin.
Are there any stressful situations that you see in the movies that are like life or death situations?
Are there any stressful or life or death situations? Well, we do have emergencies arise while we are doing spaceflight, but as you can see, probably earlier you were looking at mission control, and that's where we're sitting. We've got a whole team of people here on Earth, as well as the whole crew that can work through emergencies together. So if there were a fire or a depressurization or any of the ammonia leak, we have procedures that we would run, and we practice these here on Earth, just like you guys probably practice fire drills, maybe even some earthquake drills there in the Northwest. So we practice those things. Anytime a medical situation could arise, and we have crew members who are trained as the medical officers, unless they're already a doctor, and then they're completely certified. So we do have ways of dealing with emergencies that can arise on station. The next question.
What would you say would be NASA's greatest accomplishment?
What would I say that is NASA's greatest accomplishment? Well, I think putting humans in space is quite an amazing accomplishment. So I'm very glad that we pursued that back in the 50s and 60s when we finally were launching folks into space. But I'd also say we've done a lot of amazing things in exploration that is also non-human spaceflight. So, but putting a human in space is quite a feat because of all the things we as humans need, besides just food and water. I mean, thinking about how we have to provide air that's clean and fresh, and then scrub the carbon dioxide from it, and how we need to take care of our bodily needs besides just eating. We need to have bathrooms and things like that. So all of those things needed to be designed and taken care of for spaceflight, and I'm really impressed how we first did that, and we have continued to evolve it through time, and how it's really working great on the space station now.
All right, next question.
All right, Carson.
Yes. When you were on the International Space Station, what did you do with the free time you may have had?
That's a great question. There's not a lot of free time in space, but when you have it, there are two favorite things that I did. And one was look out the window. And I actually looked down on Idaho when I was up there, because I taught not far away from Idaho. I taught in Vancouver, Washington. And so I'm very familiar with the Pacific Northwest. I love the volcanoes and have climbed a couple of them. And so I would look out the window down at the United States, and then places I've never been in the world. Never been south of the equator. And so it was amazing to look at South America, Australia, Africa, all these places that I really want to travel to someday. And there's just also looking at space, the moon, stars, planets. I enjoyed looking at the moon because it was in a crescent phase while I was there. So it looks really neat against the dark sky. It's really beautiful. My other favorite pastime, of course, is floating and doing cool tricks, flipping around in space.
Dottie talked about them not having a whole lot of free time. A lot of things that some people don't really understand is back whenever they used to fly the shuttle and station missions together, these crews were actually scheduled in 5-minute increments. So they would be handed a schedule every day that had 5-minute chops of time that they had to basically stick with throughout the entire day. So that kind of gives you a sense of exactly what they were doing all day long.
It was busy, definitely.
All right. Maddie?
Yes.
How often does the surgeon have to help the astronauts in extreme situations?
How often do we have to help with extreme situations? Not very often. We've had a couple of things in the last few years come up. Of sometimes we have to do debris avoidance maneuvers because there's space junk, and so we are tracking this junk here on Earth, and then we have to maybe move the space station, or sometimes we just are aware of the junk and we don't have to move, but crews might have to shelter for a while. We did have a pump module go down almost 2 Augusts ago. Yeah, almost 2 years ago in August, and that it was very important because it helps cool our space station. It keeps all of the equipment cooled, and it moves all this fluids around, so it keeps things cooled. So that was an emergency, but it wasn't such an emergency that we had to like go out the door immediately and do this spacewalk. We had time to plan it here on Earth, make really good decisions, and then go do the spacewalks and repair it. And we worked as a team and repaired it. And now the space station's back functioning 100%. So it's just amazing what we can do. But yeah, sometimes emergencies come up. But like I said, we have a good way of handling them.
They train a lot.
Absolutely. We the crew train, but also the ground team trains.
They do.
They do simulations all the time here. So.
I mean, the flight controllers here, there's probably 20 people in this room. They all have different jobs, but they practice pretty much worst case scenarios a lot of times with, what's kind of the worst bad day you can have and how they react to that. So,
right.
So whenever it comes time for the actual flight, it's a little bit easier.
It's actually slower.
It's actually slower.
Yeah.
Hey, how about Vivian?
When you found out that you were going to be up in the space station, what kind of preparations did you have to do? What did they need, like mental or physical?
Oh, great question. Well, training for the flight that I went on, which was a shuttle flight going to space station, you find out about a year and a half out. And so that's the mental preparation is you start actually training as a team, and there were 7 of us on this team, and we were going to classes, and you start out, you have your assignments. So I was like the flight engineer, and I was the inside coordinator of the spacewalks, and so you have your job, and then you start learning it, and then you start doing these simulations like I talked about. Then they start throwing in failures, and pretty soon you're really working as a smooth team. So that was again about a year and a half out, and then physically, I mean, we are always training. We work out here on Earth a couple times a week as astronauts. We have a gym, we weight lift, we do a lot of things to just prepare that way, and we also, for the people that are going to go do a spacewalk, they're in the neutral buoyancy lab for about 6 hours at a time, and they do that multiple times for each spacewalk. So we might practice a spacewalk 4 to 7 times before we go do that. And now, with the International Space Station, crews are preparing and starting training 2.5 years before they fly.
Yeah.
So that's quite a commitment. And of course, it's not just the astronaut; it's the whole family that is it's kind of in training. And so there's travel and all these things that are involved. But you're just really open with your family, and you discuss what you'll do when things come up and how to deal with that. So that's how we prepare mentally and physically for spaceflight.
Blake?
How does NASA hook up spacecrafts to the space station for boarding?
How do you hook up spacecraft to the space station for boarding?
Oh, okay, that's I didn't quite hear it. Thanks. Great question. We have different docking compartments, and we also have different vehicles that come to the space station. So for humans coming to the space station, they're coming on a Soyuz right now, and there's specific docking compartments for the Soyuz that are at the back of the station in the Russian module. And then you have hatches that you go through, and there's all these pressurizations before you open hatches, and so that's how we get humans into space right now. When we had the shuttle, we also had another docking compartment, and it worked a little bit differently for such a big vehicle, and it was out in the front of the space station. Currently, we have the ATV, the European cargo vehicle that's docked to space station, and that came up robotically, and so it just docks without the need of humans, although humans know how they could intervene if they need to. And then we're going to be having this summer a visiting vehicle called HTV-3, and that's from the Japanese space agency, and that will dock to the front of station, and that uses the robotic arm. And so a crew member actually is needed the last few meters to take the robotic arm and grapple the HTV-3 and then berth it to the space station. So lots of different ways that people and cargo come to space station.
And if you ever watch it on TV and you see, back when we had shuttle and it would dock with the station or any of the Russian stuff, it looks so slow on TV. And you forget that they're going more than 17,000 miles an hour, both of those spacecraft, and they each weigh hundreds of thousands of pounds. So it's a little bit misleading when you see it on TV. It looks so slow and cautious, and it's really going pretty fast. So,
Right.
So it's impressive.
Right. All relative.
Yeah.
Relative motion.
Who's next?
Brittany, did you ask yet? How about Lexi? Other Brittany? Okay, Tyler.
What is the most stressful part about a space shuttle flight?
Wow, the most stressful part? Well, the great thing about all the training was that you feel very prepared. But I will say that I was definitely excited, maybe had a little bit of butterflies when I went out to the pad on that day to launch, because you've got so much propellant and you've got 2 solid rocket boosters that and you know how you get to space, all this thrust and energy. So you want that energy to be going the right direction. So, and that you don't have control of. That has been designed by really talented engineers, and you just have trust, and you know that we have done this many times and you've seen it. And so I was really excited, but I think that was the first time I felt a bit nervous before getting into the spaceship. And then not a lot of stress in space, because even when things went wrong, like we had things go wrong on our spacewalks, but we had trained for what to do, and we had talked about contingency situations, and we had plans. And again, like I said, we talked to the ground a lot, and they have really good ideas too. So as we do all this teamwork, I just felt like we were all very prepared and very calm, and we had good rationale for why we were doing what we were doing. So during flight, no stressful situations. It was awesome.
Dottie mentioned something very interesting, that even when it's stressful, it's pretty calm, and it's the same way as somebody who's been inside mission control and kind of watched certain challenges come up during flight. It's not like the movies where you see a lot of chaos and stuff like that. I mean, the team is very focused. They've trained for these kind of things, and even whenever certain semi-major things have happened, it's just very calm and professional. It's not like what you would expect. So,
right.
Who's next?
How about Ben? Your question?
How much money is spent at NASA each year?
Oh, money spent. Well, we get a budget from the government, and we just get a portion of that for human spaceflight and for the ISS operations. So you can actually go look up the exact details. Maybe you want to fill in a little bit, but
So out of the entire federal budget, a lot of people have they think that NASA gets a huge chunk of money, and we do, relatively speaking. We get about $17-18 billion a year. But out of the entire federal budget, that is less than 1/2 of 1% of all the money. So our share, NASA's share of the entire federal budget, is actually not that big at all. The biggest that it ever was back during Apollo, and that was only about 4% of the entire federal budget. So it's a relatively small chunk of money in terms of the entire federal government spending, but you get a lot of benefits out of it in terms of spinoffs and what this agency is able to do.
Yeah, and I think, of course, one of the big benefits is that we learn about how we can go explore better, and we want to continue human spaceflight. So we want you guys to be explorers too, just like the people that came to the Northwest when they were exploring for the early United States. So we want you guys to be explorers too.
Was there anything you didn't like about space travel that was maybe uncomfortable?
Something uncomfortable about space travel. Well,
the
suit is really hot, yes, and that's not kidding. And it's heavy, a bit heavy. So for all crew members, even those that are launching on Soyuz, you're going to have a specific suit that you launch in, and you have to sit for a while. You go out to the vehicle and you get loaded in, and then you sit and you wait. And in the Soyuz, you wait with your knees scrunched up against you, and in the shuttle, you're laying down on your back too. And so To keep us cooled off in the shuttle, we had this long underwear with little hoses in it that ran cold water through it, and you could keep pretty cool. And there was blowing air, circulating air, so that helped you. And thankfully, the April morning that we launched on 2 years ago was pretty cool for Florida, but it could get really hot. There's even mosquitoes sometimes that get in the vehicle. So that part could all be a little uncomfortable until, you finally launch. And then returning, same thing. You have to get back into that suit. And, you've been in a normal clothes. I mean, I wore this shirt in space, and you've been in these normal clothes, and then you have to get back into the suit, and it's not really comfortable. But you would totally do it for a few moments of space flight.
Well, they have to drink a lot. To talk about fluid loading, they have to drink a lot of like sport drinks and things like that. They used to have to drink kind of some like basically chicken soup watered down.
Right, there's chicken consomme, and then also we did water and salt tablets. That's what I personally chose to do. And you do that just before you're deciding to make the burn to deorbit. And so this is maybe an hour, 2 hours before you're going to be landing. You're drinking lots of bags of water. I mean, I think I was trying to drink 6 8-ounce bags of water.
That's a lot.
And you're still trying to push buttons and follow the normal checklist while drinking this stuff. Needless to say, it is not super comfortable to drink all that and then re-enter gravity. Because before, all those fluids are kind of floating in your stomach, no big deal. But then when you start to re-enter, you start to feel it on your bladder, and that's not super comfortable either. So, yeah.
Who's next?
Okay, Hannah. How do you shower?
Aha, you may not like this answer. You don't really take a shower per se. It's kind of like camping, a little bit cleaner since you're not hanging out with the dirt, but you use baby wipes to just kind of wash your skin off. There's also some wet towels and soap rinse that you can get on your skin and clean yourself with. And then there's a no-rinse shampoo that you work through your hair, and it becomes quite messy. Because if you think about it, when you wash your hair, you have extra hair that falls out, or you have skin that sloughs off, and where does that stuff go in space? It goes floating around you. So you have to make sure you keep your hair, like we stick it to gray tape, and we just kind of accumulate that way and then put it in the trash so that it's not floating around and getting in everyone's way, especially my hair. That would be kind of messy. So that's how we keep ourselves clean. But you can do it daily, or you can do it after your exercise. So you do need to keep yourself clean. It's definitely part of the important hygiene part in space. I mean, you don't want to be up there 6 months and not be keeping yourself clean.
So who wants to be an astronaut now?
Who wants to be around the other astronauts, right?
Who's next?
Okay, the other hand.
What kind of education is required to go up into space?
Say that one more time.
What kind of education is required to go up in space? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, great. You have good ears. You need to have at least a bachelor's in math, engineering, or science. And then, of course, further degrees are definitely encouraged, and an experience in those degrees. So doing research or teaching, etc., in those degrees. And so that's why we really hope that you are studying math, science, technology, and engineering, those good core STEM classes.
And also, this is one thing we always try to tell students and even college kids too, that if you want to come work at NASA, maybe you're not going to be an astronaut, but if you want to come work here, we hire all kinds of backgrounds. I mean, I've got a degree in communications, and there's other people in our office that have journalism degrees and marketing degrees, and we've got people that have human resources degrees. We've got budget people. I mean, there's all kinds. So if you want to come work at NASA and be part of this, it's one of the coolest jobs on the planet. And you can get there through all sorts of
paths.
Right.
So, you should be passionate about what you're pursuing.
That's the key.
Right.
Is go for something that you really want to do, and it's funny what doors tend to open up.
Absolutely. You guys got another one?
Austin?
When you go up into space, is the pressure really bad on your ears?
Actually, no. It's the way we design the shuttle and our vehicles is so that you really have very little change in pressure. You do get a slight change, but it is minimal compared to what you would experience in an airplane or what you would experience driving up into the mountains.
Yeah.
So not a change, because the idea is that as you go up and decrease the air pressure on the outside of the vehicle, you have the vehicle has to maintain the pressure inside very well. I mean, you don't want any leaks out, and you wouldn't want it to burst because it would be higher pressure inside and it would burst out. So we've designed our aircraft so that it maintains about 14.7 psi, which is roughly equal to what sea pressure is. So you have a little bit less air pressure in Idaho because you're up higher in altitude, but that's what we maintain within our spacecraft. And the same with the space station. It's roughly 14.7.
Yeah. Who's next?
Person.
In mission control, how many different jobs are there?
Oh, that is a great question. Like Josh was saying,
We're counting. Hang on. There's
yeah, we're looking around.
there's about 20 people in here right now.
That we have all sorts of jobs, from the flight controller and flight director, who's in charge of everyone and is overseen, to the person who talks with the crew members. That's the Capcom, capsule communicator. And then we have people who are looking at trajectory, people that are maintaining the life support systems, the thermal systems, the computers, the daily calendar, the public outreach, all these different jobs in mission control, all working as a team.
There's flight doctors. There's an interesting position called ground controller GC, which is here in the back of the room, and then the shuttle room is up at the front. But those guys run the entire mission control center, and they've got more computer screens over there than I've ever seen in my life. I mean, these guys know how to run every piece of system in this entire building, every mile of wire that we have here. So they've got a pretty tough job. And they're also the ones that actually help us communicate with the space station and the shuttle back in the day. So it's it takes a big and wide, a pretty big variety of people to help make all this work.
Okay, who has questions that wants to ask one? I can't remember who I called on, so I have it. Ready? Anybody over here have a question? Okay, let's go with Caitlin. In your time in space, what seems to be the longest job you did throughout your time?
While I was up in space, I was just there for about 15 days, and the job that I did the most was to actually be a mover. We brought up 6 tons of equipment, and we needed to move that all out of basically this big U-Haul vehicle called the Multi-Purpose Logistics Module, and get that out and get it onto station, and then we had to return trash and equipment, and so we repacked. So most of my time was as a mover. The other significant portion of my time was as the choreographer inside of the spacewalk. So I talked to Rick Mastracchio and Clay Anderson as they were doing their spacewalks the whole time. So it was a lot of talking. That was 3 days, about 6.5 to 7 hours of talking, telling them about the bolts they were going to be turning, about where their next move was going to be, where the robotic arm was going to pick up an ammonia tank, where it was going to drop it off, etc. So that was my next job. And then my final big job was as the flight engineer, but that was just on launch and entry, so that was just kind of a small job.
She got to sit up on the flight deck and actually see out the
That
windows,
was
so
awesome.
she had a cool job. Who's next?
Yeah, Ryan?
When you're in space, how much sleep do you get?
When you're in space, how much sleep do you get? Well, we can actually get just as much sleep here on the ground, and I slept really well in space. I didn't usually here on Earth. I try to get about 8 hours of sleep because I exercise a lot. I just kind of need 8 hours to be a happy person. But in space, it didn't seem, I think because you're not having to put as much resistance, since you're not working against gravity the whole time, I didn't need quite as much sleep. So I found about 7 hours was actually really great. And the funny thing is, when we sleep in space, we sort of look like zombies because our arms float out in front of us.
That's kind of creepy.
It's kind of creepy. But you sleep so well because you're not forced onto a bed. You're just kind of floating above it. And so you strap yourself into your sleeping bag.
Sometimes you stick yourself to the wall, don't you?
Yep. You have to Velcro yourself, or in our case, we had to use French hooks and put ourselves onto the wall. And if you want firmness, you can put bungees around you and like really suck yourself to the wall. But I kind of liked that feeling of floating. So that's how you sleep in space. Oh, say it again.
What is going through your mind when you realize you're up in space and you're not on your home Earth anymore? You're stuck there for about 2 months.
Well, I think you definitely realize kind of the precarious position or the position where if something went wrong, you would want to fix it fast because your vehicle is your life support. It is your only way of staying alive in space. And so you definitely take care of the vehicle. And but it was just such a beautiful experience. I mean, looking at the Earth and the floating. And so getting used to that floating, getting used to the fact that when you drop something, it doesn't fall to the ground. It floats somewhere and gets caught up in some fan or filter or wherever you have to go find it. So that took some getting used to. But just you really look at the beauty of the Earth and just how amazing it is that you can be in space, that we designed these vehicles to be in space.
Is that it?
What's the most exciting thing that you've seen while in space?
Say one more time.
What was that?
What's the most exciting thing that you've seen while you were in space?
The most exciting thing, well, looking back at where my family was right at the moment. So when we could pick out, there was one particular pass I remember early on in the flight, and Jim Dutton is from Oregon. So the two of us were looking through the cupola, and we found Crater Lake, and then we could find all these places that we had either lived in or we had family living in. And so we went from the Oregon-Washington coast all the way across the United States down to Houston. And it was just this neat pass. And all along the way, we had people that we knew or cared about. So my parents are in Colorado, my husband's family's in the Northwest, and my family right now, my husband and daughter, are here in Houston. So that was a really special moment.
All right, it looks like that's all the time that we have for questions, but I would like to have you guys say goodbye to each other. So let's start with Heritage Middle School. Would you like to thank our special guests for coming to your school live, virtually through the Digital Learning Network?
Thank you.
Great experience.
You're awesome.
And thank you guys too. You were really good. You had great questions. I enjoyed this. Thank you.
Yeah, we want to thank you guys for joining us. It's always fun to talk to you guys. So we hope to see you again here in Mission Control Houston.